This video lecture is going to go over how to create selected response items. I created this lecture with the support of one of my professors, Dr. Carol Myford. She's absolutely amazing and taught me everything that I need to know about assessment. Anything that's fantastic is totally hers. Anything that is a hot mess is totally mine. So the goal for this presentation is for you to be able to learn the 5 commandments for better writing items, learn about the different types of items for use on paper and pencil tests, and give you a set of guidelines for writing and critiquing different types of test items. And so we're going to go over the advantages and disadvantages of each type of item and look at some flawed items to help you become a better consumer of tests. The more knowledgeable you are about how tests work, the better test creator you will become. You want to be a critical consumer of already created tests so that you can make them better and work the way you want them to. Just because a test has been published by a publisher does not mean it's good. There are lots of garbage tests out there, and I'm going to teach you how to fix those. These 5 commandments for writing better items come from Popham's classroom assessment textbook. He talks about the importance of not having opaque directions, ambiguous statements, giving students unintentional clues, using complex syntax, or using vocabulary that is more advanced than needed. I'm going to go over those quickly. Opaque directions are challenging because they're unclear and incomplete. If you don't know what's expected of you, it's difficult to be consistently good at it. So don't let your directions be an afterthought. You also want to avoid ambiguous statements. It can result in the misinterpretation of an item and inaccurate answers. So you want to make sure you're careful about vague pronoun references. So for example, leaders of developing nations have tended to distrust leaders of developed nations because of their imperialistic tendencies. In this case, you don't know if you're talking about the leaders of the developing or the developed nations. So you want to make sure that you're explicitly thinking about any pronouns that you're using, and you want to reread each item through the eyes of your students. You also want to avoid unintentional clues. An inexperienced item writer may unintentionally build hints into their question, so making the correct answer twice as long as the others. So you want to avoid responses that are of different lengths, qualifiers such as always and never, and making the correct option the only grammatically correct response. You also want to avoid complex syntax. Too many clauses mess up text items. So the purchase of the Louisiana Territory, completed in 1809 and considered one of Thomas Jefferson's greatest accomplishments as a president, primarily grew out of our need for. You don't need much of that. All you really need is the purchase of the Louisiana Territory primarily grew out of our need for, and then they choose the correct answer. Use simple sentences whenever possible. You also want to avoid difficult vocabulary. Difficult vocabulary can result in incorrect inferences made using test scores. So the solution to that is avoid using vocabulary that isn't common to all of your students. Make sure that any complex academic language you're using is the complex academic language that you're using in class every day. I want you to take just a minute and choose one of these 5 commandments for better item writing and talk about why it's important. There are 2 general categories of test items. One type is selected response, where the student selects the response from a set of alternative responses, and one is constructed response, where they must construct or supply a response to an item. So the types of selected items are binary choice, multiple choice, and matching. And constructed response items are things like short answer, completion, and essay. Why do you need to know about these? You want to choose the type of item that's most appropriate for the objectives you want your students to achieve. Not all item types are appropriate for assessing all objectives. So you want to match your objectives to the appropriate item type. And so you want to think about the content contained in your objective or standard and the targeted process that you want them to be able to do. What types of items would you use for these objectives? Selected or constructed response? Read the objectives below. For all of these different objectives, you're going to use a selected response. You can use matching or some other way that they're not creating a new response for them to answer and demonstrate their mastery of these objectives. What types of items would you use for these objectives? Selected or constructed response? Read the objectives below and select your response. For these, you're going to need a constructed response. The students can't just select from a list of options. They have to do some writing. They're going to describe the main characters in a story, or label the parts of a cell, or name 3 significant people, or place numbers on a number line. These are going to be short, constructed responses. What type of items would you use for these objectives? Selected or constructed response? Read the items below and select your response. For these items, you're going to want to use constructed response. The reason is they need more than just circling an answer. So in order to be able to discuss how people's productivity at school, work, or home is affected by wealth, they're going to have to write probably a paragraph or 2. So you want to make sure that when you're asking them to do a more complex task, that you select using a constructed response where they have more space to write and demonstrate their knowledge. Multiple choice items have a stem, which is what presents the students with a problem either as a direct question or an incomplete statement, and options. These are the response alternatives that they must choose from. Sometimes they're called choices. Among the options is the answer, the correct alternative, and the distractors, or the remaining alternatives that are sometimes called foils or decoys. When you're formatting multiple choice questions, you want to make sure that each option appears on a separate line under each item. Do not list the options side by side. They may not read through the whole list, or they might think that 2 items are actually 1. It's preferable to use uppercase letters to identify each option. The advantages of multiple choice items is they're very versatile, and they can be used to measure a variety of complex learning outcomes, from simple to complex, from knowledge to application to synthesis and evaluation, and it's widely adaptable to most content and subject matters. They can be easily and objectively scored, and you can have students answer a lot of items in a short period of time. But there are limitations. They only have to be able to recognize an answer. They don't have to construct one or show their work, and good multiple choice items are time-consuming to develop. There's also a heavy demand on readability. You might have a student's ability masked by their inability to read the question. And because there's only 3 or 4 answers, you can have students guess. It's also sometimes difficult to come up with enough plausible distractors. Take a moment to read through this multiple choice item and then write down what you think the flaw in the stem is. When I look at this item, there isn't a question. It just says obsidian. And then the answers are all kind of all over the place. Is an example of an igneous rock, is made from the mineral calcite, is used in making plaster of Paris, may have at one time been granite. And so you want to make sure that your distractors are similar and that you have an actual question. So to correct this flaw, you need to make sure that the stem of the item is meaningful by itself and poses a real problem. So you could make this become a question rather than a statement. You also want to make sure that all the options are similar in length and form. So in this case, there's really only 3 correct answers. There are 3 different types of rocks, and that's it. So there's no reason to add a 4th distractor that really doesn't fit in with the other ones. You don't want to take students out of the headspace of the test you're giving them. I had a great professor in college who was amazing, and so he always put really funny things in his tests. So we were taking a test about the Mayans and what their rulers and that sort of thing. And so your question would be something about what Mayan ruler ruled during this period. And one of the answers would be Elvis. So there I am thinking about Elvis and not the Mayan rulers. So you want to make sure that those options make sense in your context and aren't a meaningless distractor that's going to take them out of the testing headspace. Take a moment to write down what you think the flaw is in this STEM. When I read this STEM, notice that the question says, in the story, Hawaiian Mystery, the name of the volcanic structure that Mark and Alicia had to cross to get free was called a volcanic ridge, tectonic plate, cauldron, or mountain. You've already given it away because it says volcanic structure. And so by having that word volcanic in the question and in one of the answers, you have given them an unintentional clue. To fix that, you want to make sure that there's no verbal associations between the STEM and the correct answer. So you don't want to have any STEM clues. So instead, you just simplify it. What did Mark and Alicia have to cross to get free? Take a second to identify the flaw in this STEM. This has a lot of information. Alex's mother asked him to take the orange juice out of the refrigerator so that they could have some for breakfast. He has 3 pints of juice. How many cups can he fill with the juice that he has? We don't need all that. You just want to know if the student knows how many cups are in 3 pints. So you want to keep your question short and to the point and avoid window dressing that can creep into an item. So set the problem material up clearly and consistently. So your STEM should be free of material that isn't needed to answer the question. Alex has 3 pints of juice. How many cups can he fill? What is the flaw in this STEM? Notice that one word in there? Not. You want to make sure that a student doesn't get a problem wrong because they missed a little word like not. If you have to use a negatively stated STEM, set off words like no, not, least, or except by underlining them, placing them on italics or in bold. That makes sure that students are paying attention to those little words that can have a big impact on what choice they make from the options. Which of the following is not guaranteed by the First Amendment? And remember, whenever possible, you want to flip negatives to positives. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. Like this one, it works. What's the flaw in this STEM? When you look at this one, you can see that a 90-degree angle is called A. Well, there's only one answer that you could use the word A for. To fix that, you just make it A and parentheses N, so it could be A or an. Don't include grammatical clues in the STEM. All of the response options could be grammatically consistent with the STEM. What's the flaw in this STEM? There's 2 clues. What is the name of the largest city in Illinois that is nicknamed the Windy City? Students can know either that the largest city in Illinois is called Chicago or that the nickname of Chicago is the Windy City. You want to know if they know that the largest city in Illinois is Chicago. There's no reason to give them 2 clues. Give 1 clue for a correct answer and focus on one concept at a time. To fix that, what is the name of the largest city in Illinois? When you're doing true-false items, they have declarative statements or propositions that students have to judge as either right, true, false, right, or wrong. So there's 6 different varieties at least of binary choice items. True, false, yes, no, right, wrong, correct, incorrect, fact, opinion, agree, disagree. They're very efficient. A student can respond to 3 binary choice items in the time it takes to respond to 2 multiple choice items. You can do a wide sampling of course material, but lots of subject matter doesn't lend itself to binary choice items. They're also easily and objectively scored and relatively easy to construct compared to multiple choice items. But you have a 50-50 chance of guessing the right answer. It's hard to find items that are unequivocally true or false, right or wrong, correct or incorrect. They're also kind of weak in providing diagnostic information about what students know and don't know. So when you're thinking about your true-false items, you want to line up the T's and the F's in a column so that it's easier for students to respond to items and easier for you to score their responses. If you put those true-falses at the end, they move around on the page depending on the length of the sentence. So you want to put them at the beginning so they're certain that they're answering the question, the item that they think that they're answering. What's wrong with this item? This is unclear. A nickel is larger than a dime. Larger in size, larger in value. There's two correct answers here. The item has to be clearly true or false, right or wrong, fact or opinion. It can't be ambiguously worded so that multiple and correct interpretations are possible. So you've got to change it up. A nickel is worth twice as much as a dime. What's wrong with this item? That word never. People who are good at taking tests learn that if it says never, most likely it's going to be false. So you don't want to provide clues to the correct answer by including specific determiners in the proposition. Test-wise students know that words like never, always, only, and every tend to make propositions false. To switch it up, copper will turn green upon oxidizing. What's wrong with this item? Again, that one little word makes it almost always true. In a parasitic relationship, one animal may benefit. You don't want to provide clues to the correct answer by including specific determiners in the proposition. Test-wise students know that words often, usually, may, and frequently tend to make propositions true. To switch that up, just take out the word may. In a parasitic relationship, one animal benefits. What's wrong with this item? That darn not. The Mississippi River does not flow northward. There's no reason to have the word not there. Avoid using negative statements, especially double negatives. If you must use a negative word, underline it or put it in italics so the students won't overlook it. But in this case, you don't need it. The Mississippi River flows southward. What's wrong with this item? This has two different ideas in it. Petroleum is a renewable resource because it can be refined into gasoline. You need to focus on only one idea per item. And in this case, one part of the sentence was true and one part was false. Petroleum is not a renewable resource, so that one is false. But petroleum can be refined into gasoline. So by making each one a separate item, you've corrected the flaw. Now we're going to talk about matching items. These consist of two parallel lists of words or phrases that require students to match the entries on one list with the appropriate entries on a second list. The premises are the entries in the column that the match is sought after. They appear on the left and they're the longer entries. The responses are in the column that you select from. They appear on the right and they're the shorter entries. They are compact. It takes a little bit of space on the page and you can measure a lot of information effectively. They're easily and objectively scored, and they're relatively easy to construct. They mostly assess low-level knowledge. I love to use them for vocabulary matching activities because it's a quick way to check that they know all the key terms. They also encourage low-level memorization of factual information. It's sometimes difficult to find homogeneous premises and responses related to your educational objectives. They really need clear directions. They have to make sure that the students know what they're doing to match the premises to the responses. It should also make it clear whether each response will be used once, more than once, or not at all. So to format your matching items, the entries in the list of premises should be longer than the entries in the list of responses. Each premise should be identified by a number, and each response should be identified by a capital letter, and there should be more responses than premises to decrease the likelihood that guessing is used for the final answers through process of elimination. You want to have between 4 and 10 premises, and they need to be in some kind of logical order, alphabetical, chronological, etc. All the premises and responses for a set of matching items should be on one page. Don't split a set of matching items across 2 pages. And again, you need that clear set of directions. So this is an example of a properly formatted matching exercise. Listen to the directions. On the line to the left of each historical event in column A, write the letter from column B that identifies the time period when the event occurred. Each time period from column B may be used once, more than once, or not at all. By including the option to use the responses once, more than once, or not at all, you're also decreasing the likelihood of guessing. What's wrong with this matching exercise? When you look at the directions, they're not very clear. What are you matching list A to list B with? You need more information. You also want to make sure that your responses are in some kind of logical order, like alphabetical. So the directions need to explain the basis for matching, how to respond, and whether each response can be used once, more than once, or only once. And you want to include more responses than premises to reduce the likelihood of students using process of elimination to make matches for the last few premises. And you want to list the responses in some sort of logical order, like alphabetical or chronological. So this is an improved version. Column A lists the major brain functions. Column B lists different brain structures. Indicate which structure primarily serves which function by placing the appropriate letter in the blank space to the left of the function. Each brain structure listed in column B can be used once, more than once, or not at all. What's wrong with this matching exercise? These need to be flipped. You need your longer items on the left because you want the heavy lifting to be done first. When you're thinking about the cognitive load of test taking, you want them to hold the big piece of information on the left side, because that way they're holding the big idea and then they're reading through quickly the short ideas that they're trying to match it to. You want the shorter responses on the right and the longer premises on the left. If you do that, it's easier for students. What's wrong with this matching exercise? This one is a hot mess. These don't have anything to do with each other. You want to make sure that everything is related to one another and makes sense to be assessed as a group. The premises need to be a homogeneous set and the responses need to be a homogeneous set. Match each food in column A to its food group in column B. Write the letter of the correct food group in column B on the line in front of each food. The choices in column B may be used once, more than once, or not at all. So here, it's very clear what they're doing and everything is related to one another.